If you enjoyed what we did here today, please hit the like button. Please share this stream with your friends and family, so on and so forth. You can also go to patriotsoapbox.com for some articles written by awesome volunteer patriots. And that being said, this has been Pixels Picks with Rooster Cogbert and Season Pixels. Coming up right now is Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel and his awesome guest. Dan, how are you doing, sir?
Great, Pixels. Good to see you back. I missed last week myself, but it's great to see you back. I always enjoy everything you and Rooster do. Thank you for being such great young patriots. Today we have two guests on our program. We have G. Edward Griffin and we have Alex Newman, who are going to be on. They really need no further introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and give it anyway. G. Edward Griffin is considered by many as a patriarch of the American freedom movement, is a writer, documentary film producer, and founder of Freedom Force International. He's listed on Who's Who of America, is well known because of his talent for researching difficult topics and presenting them in clear terms that can be understood. He's dealt with many diverse subjects, such as archaeology, ancient Earth history, the Federal Reserve System, and international banking, terrorism, and on and on and on. Oh, and he's also come up with and written several books and done several films on alternative cancer therapies. Anyway, Ed is known for his book, Creature from Jekyll Island. And we're going to be talking about the Red Pill Expo that's coming up in October in Jekyll Island, Georgia. And so we're going to be working with that. And as well, we've got on Alex Newman, who is one of my absolutely favorite people in the whole world. Both of these gentlemen are my favorite people in the whole world, but Alex is a young man who I think is probably someone who's going to have a huge impact on the future of America. He's an international journalist, educator, author, and consultant. He works and does writing for the New American Magazine, the Epic Times. He's an accomplished author in his own right, having written with Samuel Blumenfeld, The Crimes of the Educators. He's done some amazing things. This young man is fluent in 7 languages on top of all of his other skills, and he's just an amazing young man. So we're going to be talking today about the Red Pill Expo that's going to be coming up in October in Jekyll Island, Georgia. I see that both gentlemen are on. I'm going to run a very short film. Thumper, we've got a clip from Turning Point USA, and I really wanted to run that short film, Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, and I think it says in a nutshell exactly what we're facing right now in this country because of the pandemic and because of all the internal unrest that's been promulgated by the radical left, and it's a term that I don't know if I favor totally, but certainly radical subversives in this country, and that includes Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and the fact that they're promoting a change, a transition in our government from a constitutional republic to a Marxist technocracy. And Thumper, with that, would you please put on that short clip, and then we'll get on to the interview with our guests.
Here we go.
You can't kill an idea, but ideas can kill you. What if I told you that this has all happened before? The riots, the violence, church burning, attacks on police, destruction of private property, all in the name of equality. What is the deadliest thing mankind has ever encountered in world history? Is it disease? Famine? Nuclear weapons? Not even close. By sheer body count, it's an idea. This is the story of the deadliest virus in the world, communism. is 1848. Europe is burning. Political upheaval leads to mass violent riots in over 50 countries. Buildings burn, shops are looted, and national militias are called in to quell the mob. Sound familiar? This year, an obscure socialist named Karl Marx publishes the Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto outlines how to destroy capitalism and usher in communism through the means of socialism. To accomplish this goal, the manifesto pits two groups against each other based on their identity: bourgeois versus proletariat, essentially business owners versus the workers of that business. See, identity hatred is the key component that makes communism work.
The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles, Marx writes.
Today, we would call this identity politics. The principle is the same. Define people by their groups and pit them against each other with a perceived injustice, and then violence.
Marx embraces violence. He calls for the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions and for the common ruin of the classes.
What we are left with after this violent class warfare is a communist state. Marx spells out plainly what this looks like.
Complete state ownership of your life. No private property. High taxes. Government control of communications and media. Government jobs for workers. Government income for all workers. Mandatory government education and government that supersedes the church in power.
These are the programs that the left is pushing today, nearly 200 years after the writing of the Communist Manifesto. And they're using identity politics and, yes, violence to do it. Remember, this is about power and control.
In 1917, Marx's ideas got their big shot. Vladimir Lenin was a Russian Marxist living in exile in Switzerland during World War I. Lenin believed wholeheartedly in communism and saw the Russian political upheaval during the war as his shot to create a communist state. Shockingly, when Lenin asked the German military for passage to Russia in the midst of a war between the two countries, Germany enthusiastically said yes.
The Germans treated Lenin and his communism as a deadly weapon to be used against their Russian enemy, a virus to infect the opponent and cripple them.
The Germans agreed to transport Lenin across the front lines into Russia, but only via a sealed train, so Lenin and his virus could not break out into Germany.
Unleashing the deadly weapon of communism on the Russian people was a horrifically effective tactic. As soon as Lenin arrived in Russia, he began to employ identity politics and social justice as a potent tool in his civil war. Lenin told his armed revolutionaries in 1918,
"Comrade, hang, and I mean hang so that the people can see, not less than 100 known rich men. Do this so that for hundreds of miles around the people can see, tremble, know, and cry. They are killing and will go on killing."
Lenin won using identity politics to pit groups against each other, incite violence, create anarchy, and then the virus took hold.
Private property and businesses were immediately dissolved. Freedom of speech eliminated. Individual freedoms crushed. Economic collapse. Famine. Starvation. Secret police raids. Millions of Russians sent to concentration camps.
More people were sent to concentration camps in communist Russia than in Nazi Germany. In spite of practiced horrors in Russia, communism spread, and always by force.
Eastern Europe, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, North Korea, Cuba, and parts of Africa fell to communist revolutions and dictators.
It's critical to note, this mass death is not caused by foreign forces, but from within. Communism kills in the name of equality. They kill their own people. Communists do not care. They are indifferent to the suffering. Man-made famines and mass starvation in concentration camps are the norm, the cost of social justice. The death toll numbers under communism are staggering.
Eastern Europe, 1 million. Vietnam, 1 million. Afghanistan, 1.5 million. Africa, 1.7 million. North Korea, 2 million. Cambodia, 2 million. Soviet Russia, 20 million people.
But nowhere is the genocidal, sociopathic bloodlust of communism more evident than the dark history of communist China. China became a communist state in 1949 after a bloody, prolonged civil war led by Mao Zedong. After becoming a communist dictator, Mao joked about the killing of business owners in his own country, 30 million people.
We have so many people. We can afford to lose a few. Mao's attempt to industrialize China, known as the Great Leap Forward, murdered more than 45 million people in a few short years, many simply from starvation.
A total of 65 million Chinese nationals were murdered under Mao's communism. Mao kept power in spite of the genocide. Communists never give up power, ever.
They don't have to. The state is God and you are nothing. Mao's political party remains in power in China to this day, and they exercise an ironclad grip on its people.
The Communist Party of China's failed response to the coronavirus cost many innocent people their lives.
The virus outbreak, most likely from incompetent management of their own viral labs, was made exponentially worse by the communist regime's inability to admit wrongdoing and warn the rest of the world. These actions directly led to the global spread of the deadly virus, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans.
But as always, with communism, the worst is yet to come. Many of the organized leftists torching American cities are Marxists. They admit it, they say so, and they are practicing the tenets of communism to the letter.
We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
Use identity and class division to destroy private property in the name of justice. Demonize capitalists. Publicly persecute those who disagree. Incite violence and seize power and control.
In 1932, Stalinist-backed communists in Germany formed a group to violently clash with police, terrorize the public, and physically assault their political enemies in the street. The name of that group?
Antifasciste Aktion, Antifa. This was their symbol. Their tactics have now moved to our streets, and so have their motivations.
Vladimir Lenin and Karl Marx both agreed. The goal of socialism is communism. Power and control. It is always about power and control. What is happening right now in America is not new. In fact, it's centuries old. The tactics are meant to bewilder you and make you question your institutions. They're meant to divide us and raise what we know as America to the ground. It's a revolution by the deadliest virus known to man: communism. You can't kill an idea, but ideas can kill you. We must fight this virus to survive.
Dan, you're muted. Dan, you're muted.
All right. I had a little trouble getting my mute button off. I don't know why. Ed, Alex, I thought that would be a great lead-in to our discussion about the Red Pill Expo. Charlie Kirk is a really outstanding young man that I met 10 or 12 years ago here in Montana when he was first creating the program Turning Point USA. And I have to tell you, people, go to that website because they've got a lot of videos. They've got a lot of information on the Turning Point USA website. And this is exactly what we're dealing with right now in this country. There's some areas that he didn't get into with the discussion, but there are some areas that certainly they did get into, and that is how much of the Communist Manifesto is currently being conducted in this country under the name of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. The one area that Ed Griffin is going to be talking about that wasn't really covered in detail, and that is the collapse of the financial system, which is very, very essential to make this whole program come together. You've got to create the kind of famine, the kind of economic collapse that makes people desperate, and that's how they get a lot of the programs through. Ed, welcome to the program. I'll start with you. Welcome to the program, and what did you think of that video?
Well,
I thought very highly of it, to say the least. I thought that, how long was it? Just 10 minutes or so, or whatever it was. They did an amazing job of covering a lot of history and making some really hard points that most people, unfortunately, have never heard about, never thought about. And so I can say nothing negative about it at all. It's wonderful. As I look at things like that, I always think to myself, well, yeah, and I wish they had more time. They would have covered this and they would have covered that. So that's what's on my mind as I'm watching it, of course, is, gee, why don't they make that a little bit longer, like my movies? And so people can go to sleep. But
well, Ed, the reason I showed that is, I know it's probably short notice to do something like that, but I think Charlie Kirk, because of the group that he represents and the age of that group, would be an excellent candidate for Red Pill Expo. And he's got several lieutenants who work with him. If Charlie Kirk can't make it, I'm sure that he's got someone else, and that certainly would be a good group to have represented at the Red Pill.
Oh, I agree with you totally. In fact, we have to get serious in the next day or two and go over our list of who is going to be invited and who's going to be there. Actually, we have so many good people to choose from. It's going to be a real challenge, but I agree with you totally. I'd like to just finish my comment a moment ago, because when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, yeah, that was the message that I was pretty locked into back in the 1960s when I was just learning about communism. I was just reading Karl Marx and Lenin and Mao Zedong and all that sort of thing. And I was on fire, just like this video is on fire. This is nothing but Marxist-Leninism, and we got to do something about it. And I was thinking back over that period of time, while I and many others were doing that, we were totally unaware that we, in the name of fighting communism, we were building communism in our country under a different name. The idea was, look at those bad guys, they're communists, right? And we were building the same ideology in America. Collectivism is what it's called. And that's what communism is. That's what Nazism is, and fascism and socialism. It's just a variant of collectivism. So in the name of fighting one form of collectivism, we were rapidly building a new form just like it here in America. And now we're living under that. That's our greatest threat. Right now, I personally think that the threat of communism, as real and as genuine as it is primarily to get us to accept communism through the legislative process. And it won't be called communism. It'll be called social justice or something. It'll be called Americanism. And we're so focused on one form of this thing called collectivism, we forget that you can't fight collectivism with collectivism, because you lose no matter what you do. So those are the things that were spinning through my mind. And I just wish we had another 3 days to talk about that, because it's such a critical issue.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, but of course, one of the things that is being promoted through all these different programs, and you're right, it's a multi-phased approach. It's pressure from all directions, and ultimately, what they want to do is, and I think we'll agree with this, is a technocratic feudalism based on the Marxist dogma. And they only want to use that so that they can get enough of the power elite in control and take over control of things to the point where all humans are subject of being ruled by others. And that's pretty standard thinking, I think. Alex, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree 100%, Dan, and with Ed as well. I mean, we have been moving on this path now for several generations. This increasing loss of liberty, this move toward collectivism. And what's so remarkable to me is that they've been able to disguise it, as Ed explained, as a solution to fighting the very same thing that we're implementing in our country. We're on the one hand supposedly fighting communism overseas. We're sending our children off to go die in foreign wars, in foreign lands, in Korea, in Vietnam, all the rest of it. Meanwhile, And people like William Buckley, I think, had that famous quote where, we have to accept, totalitarian bureaucracy on our shores to deal with the enemy overseas. It's just so ludicrous. And, when you put it all together and you see how much progress they've made, you realize that, another generation or so and our children or our grandchildren may not ever know what freedom really was. I mean, we're almost at the point now where, you can have your life destroyed for expressing yourself. If you're in California, you could be thrown in jail now for having church, right? Now you're more than welcome. You're encouraged to go out and burn down your city or burn down churches. And it's just been so gradual. It's, the old cliche of the frog in the water. You don't throw them in the boiling water because they'll jump right out. You got to cook it, warm it up and warm it up and warm it up until finally it's too late for the frog to jump out. I think we're experiencing that at this point. The water is almost boiling, and if we don't jump out soon, it's going to be a disaster. So we have got to get on this, and it's a lot to wrap your head around. And I hope that's one of the things we can do at the Red Pill Expo is wake people up to the fact that the water is just about to be boiling, and it's now or never in terms of jumping out. So.
Well, this will be our fifth Red Pill, and I think we've done a pretty good job of letting people know exactly why we have to be concerned with this. Ed, your comment, absolutely right. See, they've learned that the human condition allows people to find differences between people as a means of separating us, slicing and dicing. They don't try to get people to really work together. I mean, they claim that that's what their goal is, but in fact, they're trying to point out all of our differences so they can create a situation where we're constantly fighting one another instead of fighting them. Ed, do you want to...
Unmute my microphone too. I almost forgot. Yeah, absolutely true. I don't know what the origin is of the phrase divide and conquer. I suppose if you dig, you're going to go way, way back in history because it just fits one of the traits of human nature. If you were in a street fight, now I almost got into a street fight once. I'm glad I eased out of it because it would have been very bad for me. But I mean, a real massive street brawl. You don't stand a chance against larger numbers, larger numbers. And so if you have smaller numbers and you want to win any kind of a battle, even a street fight, you've got to divide those guys, get them fighting amongst each other, because if they all just look at you and say that you're the guy that's going to get beat up, you're through. So it's kind of a natural human trait, I suppose, when there are fights going on. It's an ugly thought to think about. But I'm sure that the first time that Homo sapiens had a chance to sit down on that rock and think about human nature and how you avoid confrontation, or how you have power over other humans, all of those things that flood through the human mind at some point. I'm sure that the first ones way, way back sitting on that rock thought that, we got to divide our opponents up and get them fighting each other so that we can knock them all out and conquer them. So it's nothing new, nothing brilliant. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. But I'm telling you, when Karl Marx and some of his lieutenants afterwards got to institutionalize it, and they even began to hold schools on it. Many of your listeners know that back in those days, and I'm sure even today, the Marxist-Leninists go to school to learn tactics like this. They don't just sit around and talk about it. They actually show up on weekends, and sometimes they'll spend a whole week in some remote area, and they'll have schools on how to do this, and instructors, and they'll go through simulations, and they'll know how to divide the group. I remember back in the day when I was first reading some of these communist training manuals, I came across one manual that described how 4 people could dominate a meeting of up to 50 or 100 people. As a tactic, they called it the squad diamond tactic. I thought, what is a squad diamond? I was in the military in the I was in the Army, and I remember when in basic training they taught us something that was called the squad diamond tactic, and the idea was that if you're in the infantry and you're going through hostile territory and you're worried about snipers, You don't walk in a phalanx all next to each other, because the sniper can see where you are, and he knows instinctively then where the next guy is, even though he can't see him. And it's easier to pull, to knock everybody out. And you don't go in a straight line. What they do, the squad leader says squad diamond, and everybody gets into kind of a loose diamond shape, which means you go around the perimeter, and that way it's more difficult to figure out where the next man is. Well, this was called the squad diamond tactic in this communist training manual, and it was how to dominate a meeting. And the theory is that if you go into a meeting, you've got to have at least 4 people if you're going to dominate it. More is better, but 4 is good. And the idea is you place your people into a diamond shape around the outside of the meeting, one in the front, one in the back, and at least one on each side. And if you have more, then you feather it out. And so the tactic is that the people come to the meeting. They said, don't talk to each other. Don't come together. Don't let anybody know you know each other. You're part of the group. And when the time comes to do some action, while you start raising your objections or shouting your obscenities or whatever it is you want to do, making resolutions, nominating somebody to be an officer for the election of the group and so forth. And the people in the middle will be turning their heads around and saying, oh, he and she over, oh, I guess everybody in the group wants that. And what they don't realize is this well-organized structure around the perimeter. And so I remember, I'm taking perhaps longer than I should on this, but I think it's an example of what we're talking about, strategizing, and our enemy is very good at that. I decided that we were going to go to a meeting and see if it worked. So I belonged to a group. I was the chapter president of a little activist group in Playa del Rey, California. It was the John Birch Society, actually, and I was newly appointed chapter leader. I didn't know anything about it. I thought they were going to tell me what to do, and they didn't. They said, well, now you're chapter leader, go forth and conquer. So I was reading these communist manuals, and I thought, okay, let's see if this strategy works. So we had, I think, 5 people or 6 people that said they would go to this meeting of the Young Democrat Club in one of the beach cities in California. And at this meeting, Frank Wilkinson was going to be delivering a speech. Now, most people don't know who Frank Wilkinson was, but if you look up in the history, he was number 1 or number 2 man in the Communist Party in Southern California. He was a very professorial type, very dignified gentleman, spoke with big, long words, sesquipedalian words, and everybody thought he was a college professor. And he was one of the leaders in the movement to abolish the House Committee on Un-American Activities and the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. And he would go around from campus to campus and saying, these organizations that are investigating into the communist activities of people are un-American. They are themselves un-American, and so forth. So he was getting a lot of traction. The students bought into the message. They didn't know the whole story, of course. And so I knew what Wilkinson was up to, and he was going to be doing that at this meeting at the Young Democrat Club. So I said to our group, let's go. Let's have some fun. Well, I was a little bit worried about it. I didn't know what was going to happen to us, but we went. And I think 4 of us showed up. 6 were supposed to go, but 4 of us made it. Okay, it says in the manual, 4 is good. So I remember I was on the right side, and then we had 3 others in the front, other side, and the back. So Wilkinson made his presentation, and then it came time for questions. Anybody in the audience have any questions? Well, I raised my hand. I was doing my job now. And he said, yeah, what is it? I said, well, Mr. Wilkinson, is it true, according to this report that I'm holding here of the committee that you are objecting to, that there's a testimony of 2 or 3 other people who said that they worked with you inside the Communist Party. And now they broke out of the party, but they said that they worked with you. Is it true that you are a communist? Well, his face turned red, of course, and everybody turned at me like, what kind of junk is he? Everybody, the whole audience turned at me like I was some kind of a bad person for asking such an insulting question. And he pointed his finger at me and he said, you're just exactly the McCarthyite, the kind of person I'm talking about. You should be ashamed of yourself. And I'm sitting there trembling. And yeah. Well, okay. After he got done, the next hand went up on the other side. Yeah, but Mr. Wilkinson, I have another report from a different committee, and this guy says that he went with you to Moscow to train. Is that true? And, well, everybody turned and looked over there. Well, by this time, the reaction of the audience was a little bit different, and I'm just going to hasten this whole thing. By the time my other 2 point men asked their questions, and, leading questions, they were prepared to document what they were saying, the attitude in the room changed completely. There was everybody was turning around and thinking, gee, everybody knows about these things. How come I don't know these things? There were only 4 of us in this group, and I think there was about 80 in this meeting. But now the gem, and this is the point, I'm really telling you the story for this reason, because I like the ending. There was one big black fella sitting in the middle of this meeting. He's a big guy. I never forget him. And I think this was supposedly a meeting for the workers, right? The working class. Most of them were students. Most of them had really clean fingernails. Most of them had clean clothes, the shiny shoes and all that kind of thing. But this guy was a worker. I'm telling you, he was blue collar and he had stains on his clothes. He just came from work. And he's sitting there like this and he's listening to all this. And by the time the fourth question was asked, he stood up in the middle of the room and he just turned around to the group. He said, I just joined this blankety blank organization and this is my membership ticket they gave me. And if this is the kind of people they have in this meeting, I want no part of it. And he tore up his ticket and threw it away. And with that, blow me down, there about 2 or 3 or 4 other people stood up and said, yeah, me too. And they stormed out of the room. Now, those weren't part of our group. They were just caught up in the wave. And the meeting came to an end. It was a glorious success. And now the real point is, after we left, we all went down to the coffee shop, which is a couple of miles down the road, and we were there having our coffee and we were shaking our cups. Boy, that was exciting, right? We didn't know that they were going to beat us up or what, but we had a success. So we're sitting there talking about the event, and then in walks through the front door Frank Wilkinson and 2 or 3 of his lieutenants. And they walk right by us and stop. And Wilkinson backed up. He just walked backward 2 steps and turned and looked me in the face and said, who are you people? And that was the payoff, because I saw that he recognized that we were using tactics that he was trained in. And he knew that we were people. We were part of a group, that we knew what we were doing. I emphasize that because our enemy is trained. We think we're going to fight that by reading a book, by thinking, oh, that's bad. Who am I going to vote for? Are we going to have somebody in the White House? You think you're going to put up with that? No, these people are trained. They know how to manipulate groups. They know how to manipulate elections. They know how to control the mind and so forth. And so it's more than, I don't know really where I thought I was going with that, but I'm going to just wrap it up by saying they do have strategy and tactics. And if we think that we can just defeat that by going and reading another book or listening to another lecture or something, we're badly mistaken.
Yes. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what the premise of the Red Pill Expos and the offshoot of that, and I think even maybe a more important group, is the Red Pill University, because we need to provide the kind of education and training. And our training is a little more honest than theirs. We're not trying to get people to think a particular way. We're just trying to expose the thinking that is trying to take down our country.
Well, there are 2 ways to get people to think a particular way. I would like to get people to think a particular way. I have no bones about that. But I think your point is excellent, Dan, that there are several ways of doing it, at least 2. Mm-hmm. One is you can use deception, and the other is you can just bowl them over with the truth. And that's what we need to do. The truth is stronger than deception, because you cannot expose it. You can conceal it, you can bury it, you can paint it over, but it's always underneath. It's still the truth. If you dig down deep enough, you'll find it. Whereas deception, it gets painted over with lies, and you can strip those away, and then you find out it's deception at the core. So, I would like to do my best to change the way people think, but based on facts and logic and understanding of history, not just on deception.
Well, and I think that's certainly a good point, is that people, if they know the truth, more people than not would prefer the truth to a lie.
Yeah. And
as the old saying goes, this is something my mother always told me. If the good thing about telling the truth is that the story never changes. But if you tell a lie, chances are you'll forget what you said, and then you'll say something totally different. So
one exception to that, Dan, is when you get really old.
True. Well, I'm getting there. Alex, I want you to chime in on this conversation, because incidentally, I saw an interview you did with Charlotte Iserbyt here the other night. In fact, that's where I got that Charlie Kirk video originally from, was Charlotte's program. She's going to be on here in a couple of weeks with another gentleman by the name of John Klychek, and we're going to be talking about education in America. But anyway, that's an area that you focus on, and that's why you've been so rightly put kind of at the top of the list as a program coordinator for the Red Pill University. So let's get your input on that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dan. And again, I agree with everything Ed said. Education is, I think, the battle that is going to ultimately either lead us back to a free society or lead us into totalitarianism, from which it will be very difficult to escape. Now, speaking of truth and weapons in our disposal, truth is an incredibly powerful weapon. And fortunately, it doesn't cost all that much. The other side, they have deception, but deception costs a lot of money. If you want to deceive the population of the United States, you need an enormous propaganda apparatus. You need coordinating mechanisms. You need to own the media. You need massive amount of money, resources, and control to be able to spread your deception and your propaganda. Obviously, the other side has that. I mean, at this point, it's very clear that the deep state does have the ability to deceive large numbers of Americans, potentially even most Americans. I think the jury's still out on that. The 2016 election was very interesting in that basically the American people decided to defy the establishment's propaganda organs. But generally speaking, if everybody on both Fox and CNN and then MSNBC chimes in and says there's a scary virus out there and you all need to go lock yourselves in the basement and give up all your freedom, significant number of Americans will believe that. And it takes a while for the truth to eventually surface. And that's where, what Ed said about tactics is absolutely critical. The other side is highly organized and very well funded, and they know what they're doing. They're coordinating with each other. And we need mechanisms like that on our side. But it does begin with education. You can't coordinate anything if you don't understand who you are, where you came from, what is the basis of individual liberty, what is the enemy, who is the enemy. So you need an education to be able to understand these things. You need an education to be able to acquire knowledge and to be able to think at a most fundamental level. And unfortunately, our children today are being deprived of that. So speaking of the John Birch Society, we put out, the John Birch Society is one of the few organizations on the national level that is providing this organizing structure and these tactics. We put out this special report in the New American called Rescuing Our Children. We actually put it out early last year. We just released a second edition recently, and it has a few more articles and some updates to some of the articles. But we think this is going to be an incredibly valuable tool in this fight, because what we do is we expose the way that the public education system is not just indoctrinating our children, and clearly they are. I mean, the indoctrination now has gotten to the point where it's so extreme that even a lot of liberals and progressives, even though they agree with the general ideas that are being taught, are a little bit alarmed. And some of it, they cross the line when they're telling kindergartners that they might have been born in the wrong body and that they should maybe consider starting hormone injections and getting ready for surgery. Even progressive parents who are okay with the ideology think, wait a minute, does my 6-year-old really need to be thinking about those things? They're playing with toy cars. Is this really an appropriate conversation? So we hope that this resource will go around the country. Our goal is to get 1 million copies of this out, just to let parents know what's happening in the public school system. I think this has kind of become a mainstream issue, which is really encouraging. Just this year, to give you a few examples, President Trump in his July 4th Independence Day speech at Mount Rushmore said the reason for the mayhem in our streets is because an entire generation of our young people has been indoctrinated to hate America in the public school system. And he was absolutely right. So to have that as coming out of the mouth of the president of the United States. Then you had Rush Limbaugh. Now, for probably the last 8 months to a year, he has been saying the same thing that we're saying. The public schools are dumbing down your kids. They are indoctrinating your kids. They're sexualizing your kids at a very, very early age. And there really is no solution. I mean, you can run for school board till you're blue in the face. The schools are going to keep doing it. You can even run for state legislatures. They're going to keep doing it. And so at this point, parents, you really need to think about withdrawing your children from the public school system. And I think ultimately the conservative movement, the liberty movement, this is something we're going to have to confront. What good is it if we hold back the totalitarians for another 5 years, but our kids end up in their camp, and our kids hate us, and they hate our country, and they hate our freedom, and they hate our Constitution, and they hate individual liberty? What good did it do that we were able to hold off tyranny for another 5 years? Because we're going to be gone, and then our children are going to inherit this mess. So part of being able to fight back against this machinery involves getting a good education from the foundational level, learning how to read properly, learning how to think logically. If you can't think logically, you become much more susceptible to the sort of manipulation we're seeing now, whereas people who are trained to think critically, people who are trained to examine evidence and consider what makes sense, people who are trained to think about arguments in a logical manner. Does that make sense? Does that violate the law of non-contradiction? They're much less susceptible to this kind of manipulation. And then when it comes to adult education, that's where we really need to, I think, go full speed ahead here. And I think of the battle that we're really in a war, Dan. And it's not because we want to be in a war. We who love liberty, we would much rather just live out our lives and then run a business and raise our family. We don't want this whole mess. We just want to be left alone. But they're not going to leave us alone. They have brought the war to us. And first step is to understand that we're in a war. The second step is to identify clearly who is the enemy. And as Sun Tzu explained so brilliantly in The Art of War thousands of years ago, if you don't know your enemy and you don't know yourself, you're going to lose every single battle. But if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. And so that's where education comes in. That's where truth comes in. We have to teach not just the American people anymore. This is now a global battle. We have to teach people all around the world, who they are. And in America, it's so incredible because we have this amazing history, this amazing heritage of liberty that's been lost. Our young people don't know it. I talked to some young kids from a public school, 12 and 14. They didn't even know who we had declared independence from. So as a starting point, we need to teach people who they are, where they came from. They need to know their history. They need to know the foundations of their country, especially in America. And then they need to understand who is trying to steal that freedom. And so you need accurate intelligence. That's a very good reason to come to the Red Pill Expo. You'll learn about all these different things. You need to join the Red Pill University. You get classes from some of the leading experts on these subjects. Subscribe to the New American Magazine, right? Twice a month. You'll get this in your mailbox, and you'll find out, for example, what's really behind the riots. This is one that I just did recently, right? Exposing the powerful billionaires, the bankrolling the Marxist groups that are out there rioting in our streets and pushing us toward collectivism. You need to listen to shows like Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, right? This is the kind of information that will enable the people on our side of this war to understand what's going on and to understand how to effectively resist the attacks on our families, on our freedoms, on our country. So it all gets really back to education. If we let our kids be dumbed down and indoctrinated, maybe we'll hold them back for another 5, 10, 20 years. But at some point, inevitably, all is going to be lost. And I hate to sound like such a pessimist, but if you look at the polling data today, there's a lot of reasons to be pessimistic. You take my generation, for example, millennials. They just released a survey late last year, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. They did a scientific poll, and they found that among millennials, more than 2/3 self-identify as socialists. That's mostly because they don't have education. They don't know that socialist and communist governments slaughtered 100 million of their own people. They think it's all about rainbows and unicorns and equality and kumbaya, not realizing that, no, this is the institutionalization of slavery, theft, brutality, torture. So that's, I think, where we really need to focus our efforts. That is what we're doing. And we hope that people will get involved in this fight somewhere. I mean, there's infinite open positions right now for anybody who wants to get on the front lines of this and help us to defend our freedom, to defend our civilization. But if you don't do it, nobody's going to do it for you. So we do encourage people, and we do have good reasons for optimism, but this is a dire situation, and you don't want to sugarcoat it. So.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. And obviously, that's something that, Ed, you talked about early on. It isn't a matter of not having enough speakers for our events. I mean, there are so many people contact us and ask us if they can be speakers at our event. So we kind of have to pick and choose because there's a limited amount of time that we can have various people on stage, and the number is critical. there are a lot of freedom fighters out there who 100% back what we're trying to do with this movement. And what we need to do is we need to help them with their program so that we finally start to come together, all these different groups under one umbrella. And that's kind of what the whole idea of Freedom Force International, the whole idea of the Red Pill Expo and the Red Pill University is creating a clearinghouse where all these different groups with different ideas, but supporting many of the same ideas, can come together and present a product that helps to educate America and the world.
Well, that's it. That's the goal. As I mentioned before, I realized that what we're up against is not just communism, not just fascism or Nazism or even just socialism or liberalism or left-wingism or all these names that we throw around and we think, we finally got a good definition of who the enemy is. It's this ideology. It's the rock bed of all of these things. But then I thought, okay, what do we have on our side? What's our rock bed? Instead, no, we never thought of ourselves as being unified. It was, well, we got a little different idea than you. We think education is more important than foreign policy. Well, taxes are more important than that. Well, don't forget, it's our relationship with our creator that's more important, overrides everything. And everybody's got a special focus on this picture, and it's all good. It's all correct. And yet we had no common base to it. And I thought, we're missing something, guys. What is it? What is it? And it wasn't until I realized, really came to grips with the fact that the commonality of our enemy was this thing called collectivism. I began to focus on what is the commonality of our side. And it's the opposite of collectivism, which is individualism. And it was with that inkling of a light and an enlightenment and an understanding of the deeper nature of these forces that suddenly the answer was right smack in front of my face. The principles of individualism, those are the common rock. That's the rock base of all of the opposition. And so if we could just put aside our different ideas about what we think is more important in the battle and say, okay, it's all important. You guys go pursue that. We'll pursue this. And all together we join under this umbrella, this ideology umbrella of individualism. My golly, what a force we would have, and quit fighting against each other and saying, I got a better idea than you, and say, they're all better ideas. Let's put them together. Let's get unified on this one concept of individualism. And by golly, I'm seeing it coming together now. We're a little late in the game. I have to acknowledge that, but I don't think we're too late because this is an idea whose time has come.
Well, it is an idea whose time has come, and I think we tend to, I've got a friend lives in the area here, told me one time, he said, I've been hearing about the end of America for the last 50 years. It hasn't happened. We are going to continue on somehow, and we're going to fight this. Everything moves slower than we think. On the other side of that coin, I think all of us are a little surprised about how deep the deep state is, how totally controlling and how many tentacles are coming off of this takeover of our country. And I think that's always, at least me, it surprised me just exactly how much there was and how deep it was. We just need to be the kind of people that pull together with other groups to recognize, and this is something that, Ed, you and I've talked about quite a bit, the difference between conservatives and people on the other side. I don't want to call them liberals, but one of the things with conservatives is that they tend to look at a big picture, and they can agree on 80% of the items and disagree on 20%, and all they want to do is pick at the 20% they don't agree on. Where liberals can agree on 20% and disagree on 80%, and somehow they come together to work on that 20% and make it 25%. That's an area that we've got to learn how to work together. Just because we're free thinkers, just because we are open-minded, doesn't mean we can't work together with others who have similar ideas, but not the same ideas.
Well, I might add something there. It raises an interesting question that I sometimes get when people have read our essays on this topic of the evils of collectivism. The question is generally this: well, yeah, you believe in collectivism because now you all want to get organized, right? You want to work together. So you're collectively working together. So you're violating your own logic, right? And of course, I have to come in and say, no, and that's not quite right. You have to understand the difference between the word collectivism and the word collective action, or the phrase collective action. They're not the same. They sound the same. They have a commonality in that in both cases, you're working together. But in the case of collectivism, you are working together because you have no choice. You are being told to work together in a certain way, and when and how long and so forth. And if you don't, you go to prison or you die. That's collectivism. Collective action is voluntary. That's the basis of the freedom. Just because I believe as an individualist and I don't like collectivism doesn't mean I have to move my piano alone. When it comes time where I need some help, I can turn to my friends and say, hey, I got to move the piano tomorrow. Can you help me out? Well, they'll show up. Or if they don't show up, tough luck. I got to find somebody else. I can't go say, you have to do it because it's your civic responsibility. And so once people understand the difference between voluntary cooperation and involuntary cooperation, suddenly the pieces go together. We're talking about the value of liberty and freedom of choice. Our opponents say, no, freedom of choice doesn't work. You have to be told what to do and forced what to do. Otherwise, you won't make the right decisions. And therein lies the cleavage between the 2 points of view.
Well, and they always say that it's obviously better if we have a whole bunch of people making decisions together so that they can come up with a commonality that works for everyone. That's the argument that I hear. But okay, let's say that that's true. It isn't, but let's say that that's true. What happens to the rights of the individual? And that is exactly what this country is all about, is the fact that if you don't have individual rights, you can't have collective rights. You cannot have a group of people who are representing good ideas if someone has the control that's necessary to shut off dissent, shut off differing opinions.
Well, yes, and after going through all of that reasoning in my essay, which you probably remember is called The Chasm, mm-hmm. And by the way, if anybody wants to read this, you can find it on the Freedom Force International .org site, but it's kind of long, kind of wordy, and maybe needs to be tightened up. But anyway, the idea is that collective action. Let me summarize this. The mantra of collectivism is for the greater good of the greater number. Okay, and the idea that leads to is that therefore the individual has to be sacrificed if necessary mm-hmm. for the greater good of the greater number. But when you run all the numbers through it and you do all the calculations and all the social conditions that you can possibly think of, and you realize how universally that concept fails to produce the desired result, you come to the amazing conclusion that defense of the individualism, in fact, is the greater good of the greater number. That's how you get it, by focusing on the individual as the core of society and not the group.
Absolutely. And that's also part of our rule of law under our system of government, is to protect the rights of minorities, to protect the rights of individuals who would otherwise, if you talk collectivism, their rights go away as soon as they've got 51% of the people have a particular idea. The other 49% become slaves of the state. And that's really how it works, isn't it?
Exactly. It's even worse than that, because actually it's usually about 3% of the population who claim to have 51% of the votes. True. But that's not how it works. But in theory, yeah, 51% is still not a good number for the other 49%.
That's right.
But unfortunately, it's even worse than that.
Well, I read a recent article on Alex. You've spent time in South Africa. Now they've been they've been living under communism for the last 27 years under Mandela. I mean, they tried to soft soap it. They tried to make it sound like Mandela was just a nice socialist, but in fact, he was a hardcore communist. When he was in prison, it was for good reason, because he was leading the ANC terrorist movement that did a lot of bombing and destruction in South Africa. Alex, I don't know if you've seen this or not, but under communism now, large parts of South Africa are hungry, are starving, because they've destroyed the white farming segment of the population. They're in the process of trying to destroy the entire thing. And when they do, they'll end up with a failed state like Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe.
Yeah, it's a tragedy of immense proportions, and it's actually just an advance look, a sneak preview of what's coming to America if we continue down this path. So for some background to people who are hearing this and they're shocked, what do you mean Nelson Mandela was a communist? Well, it is now a documented fact that Nelson Mandela was a communist. He denied it for his entire life, but upon his death, both the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party openly bragged that he was not just a communist, he was a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of South Africa, which itself was a front for the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, one of the most murderous organizations to have ever existed on this planet. And Nelson Mandela had been working with them going back to the beginning of his career, which included terrorist bombings, bombing nightclubs, bombing shopping malls, bombing farm roads. His wife, of course, was famously recorded advocating the liberation of South Africa through necklacing, one of the most barbaric tactics imaginable. They literally fill a tire with gasoline, put it on your neck and set it on fire. There are very few ways to kill somebody more painfully than necklacing. And incidentally, it was primarily used against black opponents of communism, not so much white people. Those were killed with bombs and things like that. Absolutely horrifying. They would take black police officers and they would murder them in this way. They would take people who were accused of being spies. Some of them would be taken to terrorist camps in Angola and tortured in the most horrifying ways imaginable. And all the while, the world was being told that this was some sort of freedom fight. Now, there was plenty of things wrong with the apartheid system. Nobody's going to defend apartheid, but it's not apartheid or communism. But that's what the establishment tried to boil it down to. Either you like apartheid or you want communist slavery. And the communists were clever, like they have been in the United States, in terms of concealing their ultimate agenda. And in South Africa, they had a different approach to obtaining communism than they did, say, in the Soviet Union. They actually divided it up into phases. They just now have recently, in the last few years, entered what they call the radical second phase of their communist revolution, which is now why you have the president openly saying, yes, we're going to steal your farm. No, we're not going to give you any money for it, etc. And the result will be absolutely predictable. It will be mass starvation. It'll be exactly the same as what happened in Zimbabwe. This is no mystery. Anytime you take away private property rights, you get an absolute implosion of productivity, no exceptions. People say, oh, look at Sweden. You know what? I lived in Sweden for most of the last decade. Sweden has stronger property rights in many ways than the United States does. Yes, they have very high taxes. Yes, they have a large welfare state. But most of the Scandinavian countries score near or even above America on the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, which measures things like security of property rights and other important factors that go into a free market. So there's no socialism in Scandinavia. It's capitalism with a bigger government and higher taxes, but in many ways freer markets than the United States. And, I just interviewed a good friend of mine. He's a good friend of yours now also, Dan. I just did an hour interview with him for The New American. You can find it on our YouTube channel. I highly encourage you to take a look. Let me see if I can find his book, because I just had it here. But you know which book I'm talking about, Dan. It's Amabulu.
Harry Booyens.
Yes, Harry Booyens. And, this guy is, I think, one of the most brilliant analysts to come out of South Africa. He lives in Canada now, but he's got a family history stretching right back to the beginning of South African history. And fascinating, man. And he just put it plainly. He said, if you want to see your future America, $1,500, get yourself a ticket to South Africa, and you'll see exactly what's coming to your country if you go down this path. And we are going down that path. In fact, back in 2017, he warned exactly what was going to happen with this statue thing, right? Before it was happening. He said, first, they're going to target statues of Confederates like Robert E. Lee. Then they're going to go for statues of people like Thomas Jefferson. Then they're going to go for statues of anybody at all who represents real history. And we see that now. They're beheading statues of people who died in the Civil War fighting to free the slaves, for crying out loud, right?
Or Frederick Douglass of all.
That's right.
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln, for crying out loud. I mean, there's nobody who's immune now to the cultural revolutionists. And, South Africa, they were able to get it done more quickly in South Africa than in the United States because South Africa didn't have the foundations that we have in America. Yes, the Europeans who went down to South Africa had many similar ideas. They were very similar culturally, religiously to the people who settled the United States. But they didn't set up, I should clarify here. There was a very big divergence point in South African history and American history. The Afrikaners fought the British and lost. And so they ended up under British control. It was far more easy to destroy them. In America, we fought the British and we won. And we set up a system of government based on what our founders articulated, which was very clear. Anybody who studies the real history will find this articulated very clearly. And it goes right along with what Ed says, but they brought in the spiritual component. So you take Sam Adams, for example. He's often described as the father of the American Revolution. He set up the committees of correspondence. And if you read the very first document that they circulated in the committees of correspondence, actually some of the words were later borrowed for the Declaration of Independence. What Sam Adams said was, every human being on this planet has certain unalienable rights that come from God. The best place to find out what these rights are is to turn to the New Testament of the Bible. And so what were these rights that Sam Adams identified as being inherent to every individual? Well, the right to your life, right? Why do you have a right to your life? Well, they said God created you in his image. God is the author of your life. And therefore, and he said, thou shalt not kill, therefore, or murder. Therefore, anybody who revokes your right to life is committing a crime and must be punished, right? That's where they got the right to life from. Then they said, you have a right to property. God said, thou shalt not steal. God is the author of private property. If you work, you ought to be able to keep the fruits of your labor. And this is common sense. Even if you don't have the Bible, it's common sense that you ought to, if you build a cabin, you ought to be able to live in your cabin. And so they distilled this all down, and then they set up our government based on that foundation. If you read the Declaration of Independence, they said very clearly, it is a self-evident truth that all men are created equal, that all of them are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and that to protect these rights, governments are instituted among men. That is why they set up our government. And so they built the foundation of our nation on very, very solid foundations. It's taken them, over 250 years to try to break down what our forefathers cemented into place. And that's why America remains so prosperous and, to the extent that we're still free today, free relative to other countries where, similar ancestors, similar peoples, it didn't end up free. And the tragedy of losing that is just incalculable. And so I'm glad we're talking about South Africa, Dan. I really encourage people. I've written about this very, very extensively. I moved down there when I was 18, not for any noble purpose. I just had a lot of money and had some friends who were from there and thought, hey, it'll be fun. I'll go party with my friends and rent an apartment on the beach. That'll be cool. But it ended up being a learning experience like nothing else in my life. So I made a lot of friends down there. I learned from their experience, and I developed lifelong friendships that I maintain to this day. And I think it was almost divine providence maybe that I ended up down there and was able to learn from their experience, because what we saw in South Africa in the 70s, in the 80s, is almost the same thing that we're seeing now in the United States. Mm-hmm. Only it's, slight modifications of the arguments, but ultimately it's the same thing, right? They're saying that liberty, we're seeing it now in America very clearly. They're saying basically everything that they don't like is white supremacy. So individual liberty is white supremacy. The Christian church is white supremacy. The rule of law is white supremacy. Now in Seattle, apparently even math is white supremacy. Now, I would argue that that is an inherently racist argument. The idea that civilization can only be associated with people with light skin, that's ludicrous. How are you going to say that that is an inherently white thing? That, in my view, is a racist argument, but that's what they've done in America. The left, the radical left, the totalitarians, and the collectivists are trying to argue that everything they want to destroy is racism and white supremacy, and if you defend those things, rule of law, individual liberty, individualism, and so on, then you are a white supremacist. It is self-evidently a ludicrous, racist argument, and yet it's being made, and it's being believed by a significant number of our young people precisely because, as I said in the last segment, they have been deprived of even the basic rudimentary tools of thinking. If they were capable of examining these arguments through a logical lens, reasoning through these things and saying, does that make any sense? They would come to the conclusion that, no, that's obviously ridiculous. This is part of a tactic to try to con us out of our freedom. But because they've been deprived of those tools, they haven't heard any other arguments. They've been brainwashed in school, then they were brainwashed by the fake media. We're in the situation that we're in now. And for all these people who think that's going to be a good idea, I echo Harry Bouyen's advice. Get yourself $1,500, get yourself on a plane, go fly into Johannesburg, go take a trip to the countryside, and tell me whether that is what you want for your children and your grandchildren.
Well, I think that would be a good idea to send a whole bunch of Antifa people there, and they could enjoy fellow comrades. Incidentally, though, that's a perfect conversation, Alex, because Harry Bouyen was one of our speakers at the Red Pill in Spokane, Washington. So this is a perfect example of how we bring all these people with all these great ideas together to provide information. And incidentally, Ed, tell our listeners a little bit about the fact that we record all these things. Ken Gullickson and his crew record all these programs, and we have videos available for everything we've done. And most of that information is also available on at the Red Pill University, and we will be providing a live stream for the upcoming event in Jekyll Island as well.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dan. And yes, if you want to watch those videos, I highly encourage you to go over to Red Pill University and you'll get all the videos. But I want to share something, hopefully motivate some people to come out in person too. One of the things that Harry shared in our recent interview, that you can find that again at the New Americans YouTube, was an interaction he had with Reverend Matthew Cummings at the Red Pill Expo. And he actually started crying in the YouTube video. He teared up and choked up because it was so powerful. Now, Matthew Cummings, he is probably one of my favorite preachers on this planet. The guy is just incredible. Black American, dark-skinned American. His mom put him in a communist training school when he was a kid, actually Bill Ayers, a communist terrorist school. And they started teaching him you should disobey and hate your parents. And he told his mom, he's like, what? Out you go. So yanked him out. But Harry Bouyen, who was one of our speakers at the Red Pill Expo, and Reverend Cummings, who's a pastor up in Washington State. Now he's moving his ministry over to the Midwest. But they ran into each other at this conference. And Matthew Cummings said to Bouyen's, hey, I know your story. I know what you're going through. I know what's happening to your people. Can I pray for you? And so this incredible, beautiful moment took place at the Red Pill Expo, where you had a Black American pastor and a white South African refugee coming together and praying. It just Harry broke down in tears and starts crying. And, how can this American pastor, love me and love my people so much, and yet your average person in America and in South Africa doesn't even understand what's going on here? An incredible, beautiful moment that you would only have if you actually came in person to the Red Pill Expo. It's an amazing experience. It's unlike anything else. The lineup of speakers is incredible. If you can't make it for whatever reason, the next best option is to get the live stream and to join Red Pill University and watch those speeches that way. But if you can get there in person, there's nothing like it. It's an incredible opportunity for networking, for meeting these speakers, these internationally known leaders of the liberty movement. Ed Griffin, for crying out loud. I mean, that on its own is worth the price of admission. So, we hope to see you there, and come check it out. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ed, you really are the patriarch of the freedom movement. I know that you find that a little bit humbling, but the fact is you are, because you've been in this fight longer than just about anybody has been in this fight. I think of some of the videos that you've done that go clear back to the 1960s. One of the most powerful videos I've seen is where you're talking to a group in, I don't know, Thousand Oaks, somewhere in California in 1968, and you're explaining what is happening with collectivism taking over the United States. So, you don't give yourself enough credit for the fact that you really are the tip of the spear of the freedom movement.
Well, thank you for that, Dan. But that's kind of, I am quite humbled by that because I know better. The only thing that makes me really different is that I'm older than most people. I've been at it longer. So when Alex gets to be my age, they'll be saying things about him like that. Well, you are a tip of the spear and you're an icon. You're the grandfather of the movement. I don't like some of those phrases because it sounds like I'm at the end of the line. I would rather be called a millennial, Oh, you're the young, good. In fact, that's kind of funny. I've got to tell you this side of it. In the beginning, whatever that means, but in the beginning in my exposure to these things, it seemed like every place I went and everything I ever did, I was always, oh, he's the youngest person in this group, and then all of a sudden it's like the alarm went off and bingo, oh, he's the oldest person in this group. I don't know what happened in the middle between there. I think I have some lost time experiences, but I would much rather be looked at as a young person, and I'd like to think of myself as a young person because, and I do, by the way, I don't have many thoughts about, gee, I better start, getting my affairs in order pretty soon because the train is slowing down, is coming into the final station. I keep thinking about, what's next? What are we going to do next? And how long is that going to take? And how do we organize? I think that's perhaps a good thing for me, and I'm not doing it on purpose. It just sort of happens. So anyway, that's what I would recommend anybody of my age is stop being the grandfather, stop being the icon, stop being the tip of the spear, and just be part of the movement and get on with it.
Well, and there's a certain luxury of being a senior citizen, and I'm one now too. You've got a few years on me, but the fact is you are a perfect example of how they say 80 is the new 60. So let's hope it's that way. But also, Ed, we've talked about this. There's a certain amount of freedom in speaking truthfully when you know that you've had a wonderful life. You've had all these years. You've had a chance to do so many good things. And the bottom line is, what are they going to do? Kill you? Yeah.
Well, okay.
Well, the thing is, God has blessed me with probably 50 years more than I should have had anyway, the way I lived as a teenager. And so, the reality is God put us here for a reason. And one of the reasons is to be as outspoken as we can be. And there's a certain luxury in knowing you've already had enough of your life that you've had that's been so wonderful and so blessed that you kind of forget about being afraid. My wife tells me, sometimes aren't you afraid of some of this stuff? No, not really, because the fact is, I think fear stops more people than anything else, a fear of the unknown or a fear that something's going to happen to you. And one of the things, the best veterans in a combat situation are the ones that realize that if they don't fight and if they don't make it count, that they're probably going to end up dead anyway. So why not make it a good and honorable fight and do the best you can?
Yeah, I've heard the story. I don't know if it's true or not, but I'd like to think it is true. It was the landing. The soldiers were in the landing barge about ready to hit the beach of Normandy or wherever it was. The enemy was all waiting for them, and it did not look good. The front of the barge was going to drop, and they had to go hit the beach, and they knew that they'd be facing a lot of gunfire. And the guys were scared to death. Oh, my God, this is it. And supposedly the old sergeant he said, all right, men. He said, some of us are going to die today. and the rest of us are going to die later on. Let's hit the beach. I remember that many, many times since then. Maybe he never said it, but I hope he did.
Well, one of the things too, and this is something that Alex can certainly chime in on, we are God-fearing men. And, I know ultimately they may be able to kill my body, but they're not going to kill my soul. And it's better that we're soldiers in this war and soldiers for Christ than we are just, somebody out there mucking around. Because ultimately, hey, this may be the best thing that ever happened to us if we really believe. Alex?
Yeah, I agree 100%, Dan. And, the Bible has a lot of written instructions that I think everybody should take to heart. In my work as a journalist, I always go to Ephesians 5:11. God tells us that we should have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but we should expose them and we should reprove them. And so, I take that to heart and I say, hey, I'm going to expose and I'm going to reprove all day, every day. If I see you doing evil, I'm going to expose it and I'm going to reprove you. And that's one of my passions. But it's it's just common sense things. There's clear battle lines in the world. There's good and there's evil, and you get to choose which side you want to be on. Do you want to fight to kill and enslave and torture and murder and steal people's property? I mean, is that what you want to do with your life, or do you want to do what's right and defend people's lives and defend people's liberty? And it really should be a no-brainer. And I think there's also, in this battle that we're in, Dan, there's an added spiritual component to it. And, one of the things that's so amazing to me is that the vast majority of America claims to be Christian. The numbers are declining with the steady indoctrination in the public school system and then the fake media ridiculing Christians. But the overwhelming super majority of Americans, well over 2/3 of Americans, describe themselves as Christians. Well, if they would just open up their Bibles, which they supposedly believe is the Word of God, they would look in there and they would find all of these things that our founding fathers said were self-evident truths. That we need to respect other people's rights. We shouldn't be killing each other. We shouldn't be stealing each other's stuff. Marxism and collectivism, it's essentially a total and complete repudiation of everything that God teaches. And we see that coming more and more clearly into view right now. They used to kind of disguise some of their aims, but even if you go back to Karl Marx, it's just a total and clear repudiation of everything that God teaches. So God, of course, is the author of liberty. He says in the Old Testament, you should go proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all the inhabitants thereof, right? I've got a little Liberty Bell behind me, right, from the founding era. It's got that verse right around it, okay? Then you go to the New Testament, it says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And I think that's one of the reasons America enjoyed liberty for so long was because of the fervent faith of the American people in the truths that the Bible teaches. Then you look at family, right? Karl Marx argued that women should be held in common, right? It shouldn't be a monogamous marriage relationship that produces children and raises the next generation and transmits the values and stands as a massive bulwark to tyranny. Women should be held in common. We'll have communal women. And, ask your wife what she thinks about that. My guess is she probably will not be a big fan. But again, it's an obvious and clear example of these teachings completely contradicting the obvious truths of the Bible. And so when the Bible tells us that we're in a spiritual battle, that this is a spiritual war where evil is coming for you and is coming for your children, that Satan wants to kill and destroy, I take that seriously and I believe it. And I believe that God loves liberty. He makes it very clear in his word. And so, I choose to make my life about this, right? To do the things that are right as God has revealed, the things that are right. He wrote his law into all of our hearts. We all know that there's something wrong with murdering, that there's something wrong with stealing, that there's something wrong with lying and cheating. And so, that's a good hill to die on as far as I'm concerned, and I love the thing from World War II, right? People who get nervous and who get worried about this. Oh, well, if I speak out, maybe one day they're going to throw me in a FEMA camp. if you don't speak out, they're going to throw you in a FEMA camp. Okay. So put on your big boy pants, and it's time now to get serious about this. How far do they need to go? How far do they need to push before you finally say, okay, no, now you've gone too far. Now I'm going to say something. Well, at that point, it might be too late to say something. Better to do it now while you have the opportunity to get out of this mess, while you have the opportunity to resist, while you have the opportunity to share the truth with your neighbors and your friends and your family without getting put in a camp. Then wait until you're actually in the camp, and then you can discuss with all the cool people what went wrong, right? It's a good time now to get involved, and I so appreciate that you talk about the spiritual component of this, Dan, because I think it's critical to understanding what's going on. What we're dealing with these evil ideologies is more than just bad people with bad ideas. I mean, these are absolutely evil. They're evil. And you can see that in the fruit, right? The Bible tells you to judge a thing by its fruit. What has been the fruit of this poison ideology called Marxism, collectivism? What has been the fruit? You don't have to be a historical scholar to look around, right? 90 miles from the shore of Florida, we have a perfect little example of what happens when you implement this disaster. People starve to death. They put people up against a wall and shoot them. 1 million people have to flee this disaster open-air prison and come to Miami because it's so horrible. How many people flee from Switzerland? How many people do you see fleeing from the United States, right? Not very many, right? Fleeing to socialist utopia. It's because the fruit of these poisonous ideologies is so obvious. Death, destruction, shortages, concentration camps, gulags, not enough medicine to go around, not enough food to go around. So, guys, it's just, it's in your face. It's obvious. It's time to resist.
Yeah. Well, and incidentally, we've done a radio program on this, but Marx was actually a Satanist, and he wrote a play dedicated to Satan. And one of the statements that he made, and of course the communists don't publish this sort of thing. He wrote over 100 different dissertations, books, and papers, and only about 10 of them are actually in publication by the communists because they don't want people to know that one of his statements that he was very famous for is that he wanted to destroy humanity, and his program would lead to the destruction of humanity. Now, how would anybody in their right mind follow someone with that basic philosophy? You've got to be nuts.
That's exactly right, Dan. And I encourage people to go get that book. I think it's one of the most important books written in the 20th century because Marxism has been so influential. The book, at least the one I'm thinking of, Dan, is called Marx and Satan. It's by Pastor Richard Wurmbrand, who was a Romanian pastor, and he was put into a communist gulag in Romania and brutally tortured for years and years and years. And when he got out, he thought, hey, man, and he would pray for his captors. They'd be torturing him, and he'd be forgiving them. It's an unbelievable story. He's got a book about his experience called Tortured for Christ. I also highly recommend that one. But when he got out, that must be satanic. So that was his thesis. This is satanic evil, this Marxism. And, he didn't realize how much evidence he was going to find, because as he started digging into Marx's own writings, and you can read them in the book Marx and Satan, it costs about $1,000 to get the book now. Fortunately, it's available as a PDF. So I tell everybody, just go on the internet, search for it, and download the PDF now while you still can. But he quotes a whole bunch of Marx's poetry. And, Marx would say, oh, religion is the opium of the masses, or the opiate of the masses. And, he put on this show that he was an atheist. He was just aloof and didn't believe in, primitive ideas like God. But when you read his poetry, he didn't question he wrote poems directed at God. And he said, I hate you, and I want to destroy what you've created. And then suddenly Marxism makes perfect sense in that context. And I think that is one of the key things to understanding how this horrifying ideology came about. And you're right. Your average, Lenin called them useful idiots. Your average useful idiot who's out there, protesting in the streets against the system and the man, doesn't realize that they're being used for these evil purposes. And that's where we go back to what we started the program with. If they had the truth, they wouldn't be out there doing this. They'd be with us, right? And so that's our big challenge, is to use truth as an effective weapon. Wake up these poor kids who've been sucked into this evil, this satanic ideology, and get them to come back to their senses. If they knew that they were being manipulated and used to usher in a system that would result in what we've seen in North Korea, in Cuba, in Vietnam, in the Soviet Union, in China, some of them would still be involved, but most of them would say, oh my goodness, that's a horrible idea. I'll do anything to prevent that from happening. And so that's our challenge. Fortunately, truth is on our side, and it's an incredibly powerful weapon for us. Now we just need more soldiers out there willing to pick up that weapon and help us to go forward with it.
It's a great comment there, Alex. Am I on? Yeah. I think that more of these activists, probably not the best word, but most of these destroyers that are in the street that are so highly motivated for what they consider to be high principles, I'm sure, most of them, if they understood the real strategies of their enemy, they would understand, for example, all of the stories that I've written, the testimonies of the people, especially the people of color, the people from the black race who were in the Communist Party and broke away after years of being in there. Some of them went to Moscow and trained. I'm thinking guys like Leonard Patterson, who I found driving a cab back in Philadelphia, I think it was. And he was a former high-ranking communist member of the racial committee or whatever they called it here in America, trained in Moscow. And then other people, I mean, the point is, they all say when they finally come out of the party, said, man, we found out they were using our people for cannon fodder. Mm-hmm. Cannon fodder is the word they like to use. And then I had a chance to interview this KBG director. I'll get it out, defector. I think I better stop drinking my coffee here as I get KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov, and he called them useful idiots, and he was talking about they always use these people that they can propagandize and agitate and get them fired up and to do the violence and to kill their enemies in the first stages of the revolution. But after they've done the bloodbath, then those people are eliminated. And because we know when they find out that they've been tricked and that what they brought into being was not the utopia they thought it would be, but is hell, well, then they would be against us. We know that. So we just kill them. That's what he said. Mm-hmm. And I think if these young activists or revolutionaries or whatever they think of themselves, justice warriors, understood that was the strategy, they might think once or twice more about what they're doing. They're not going to do well any more than we are if they succeed. In fact, they might really not. They might be the worst to pay the highest price, I would think. Mm-hmm.
Well, Ed, and incidentally, the president's going to come on for a few minutes to talk about the availability of hydroxychloroquine. So we're going to maybe cut into that very briefly. Thumper will let us know when that comes up. But anyway, one of the things that most people need to realize when they're in these movements, in these violent groups, is that the same people who are paying for their activism are the people who are at the very top of the economic ladder. Do you think these people are going to try to bring down a system that has built their entire empire? I think of people like Bill Gates and the Rockefellers and people who have more money than they know what to do with, and they fully intend to be in charge of this whole pyramid, this whole structure, once they overthrow our system of government, our constitutional Republican system.
Well, I think the money itself has a lot to do with that, Dan. I'm convinced that 99% of these Antifas and BLM people, we wouldn't hear a peep out of them if they weren't receiving a pretty nice weekly paycheck. Mm-hmm. They're trained revolutionaries. They're mercenaries, really, what they are. And they may have high ideals and all that sort of thing. But if they didn't have a means of sustaining themselves from people like George Soros and sources from the deep state, if they weren't hired by our universities and given professorships and getting those paychecks every week, they would disappear. They'd have to go do something else. And they wouldn't be in the streets. They certainly wouldn't be breaking the windows windows, throwing the gasoline, showing the fist and shouting through megaphones. They wouldn't be doing that. They'd be out trying to make a living. So the money has a lot to do with it. You know, they say it's pretty hard to criticize your boss when you're getting a nice paycheck. And so I think there's a lot of that. And whether these people know it or recognize it or not, I don't know, but it's certainly there at some subliminal level.
Well, and I see this all the time with the environmental movement. This is a program that we've talked about in the past as well. And these environmental groups, they're in it for the money. They're not in it for the environment. I mean, it's a huge paycheck. And some of the top people at organizations like Defenders of Wildlife or Natural Resource Defense Council, groups like this are receiving six-figure paychecks that are high six-figure paychecks.
Yeah.
There's a good reason for that. Yes, Thumper.
Okay, they've activated the live feed. President hasn't entered the room. I will break in as soon as he enters the room and begins his remarks.
Okay. Well, Thumper, can we put up on the screen right now the cover page for the Red Pill Expo in Jekyll Island, Georgia? I want to make sure that we get as much press as we can on this whole program, Red Pill Expo, and then maybe we can get into the Red Pill University.
Okay. Okay, here we go.
Okay, this is the Red Pill Expo. If you go to redpillexpo.org, and on that webpage there is all the information on the Jekyll Island program that's coming up October 10th and 11th. And Ed, you might want to explain how this is a web page that's constantly being updated and constructed, but people can get on the site and they can get their tickets right now.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. We were in dormant mode for quite a while. Hopefully you'll all have a chance to see that video that I just made last night, early this morning, that gives you the full background on it. But the short version is, oh yeah, there it is. The short version is that we originally planned to have the expo back in June, ready to go. It was going to be a big event. Everybody wanted to go to Jekyll Island, the origin of the Federal Reserve System, and go wiggle our fingers, our noses at them and so forth. But anyway, along came the Corona Theater, and everybody got afraid. Oh, what's going to happen? Maybe we better cancel. Maybe nobody will come. Maybe they won't be able to come. Maybe they'll shut us down. So everybody went into fear mode, that dreaded fear mode, including us to some extent, not so much the fear, but the uncertainty of what's going to happen. We just didn't know. So we postponed it to October. So between June and now, we've been sort of waiting and seeing to see how things would turn out. And now we've waited long enough. We see how things are turning out. And as I think it was Alex who said, you know, if we don't speak out now for fear of going to the FEMA camp, then for sure that's where we're going. So that's the kind of attitude that we have here. If we don't step up now, then when? If not here, then where? And if not us, then
Thank you very much.
Nope, it looks like we're going to get cut off for a few minutes.
Good to see you all. Hope you had a great weekend at your convention. And we're going to have a great convention coming up, and I look forward to it. But before I discuss a very historic breakthrough in our fight against the China virus, I'd like to provide an update on the recent wildfires in California and the storms in the Gulf of Mexico. Yesterday, I approved a major disaster declaration for California, spoke to Governor Newsom as they battle two of the worst wildfires in the history of their state. That continues. The federal government has already deployed over 26,000 first responders and personnel to battle the wildfires. We're working very closely with the governor and very closely with a lot of great state representatives and local representatives, and we'll take care of the situation. But we have 26,000 first responders already. Our hearts go out to the thousands of families who have lost their homes as we grieve for the families of 2 first responders and 5 residents who have tragically lost their lives. It's been a very horrific fire, one of the biggest we've ever seen. My administration is also closely monitoring Hurricane Marco and Tropical Storm Laura, which are coming in rapidly. Hurricane Marco is expected to make landfall in Louisiana tomorrow, and Tropical Storm Laura is expected to hit Louisiana 2 days later. This is somewhat unprecedented, the scope of the storms and also the fact that they come so quickly after one another. Both storms have the potential of gathering strength before they make landfall and could cause significant damage across the Gulf Coast and also in Puerto Rico. We have everybody stationed and ready to go in Puerto Rico and the Gulf Coast, and we have tremendous people. We have FEMA is lined up, and we have the Coast Guard ready. The Coast Guard has done a fantastic job. They do such good work, and we want to thank our great Coast Guard. I'm asking all Americans in the storm's path to follow the instructions of your state and local governments very closely. And I've approved emergency declarations for Puerto Rico and for Louisiana. FEMA is mobilized on the ground and is ready to help. They will be in there very quickly. Very, very quickly. And I spoke to Governor John Bell Edwards also of Louisiana, and I've informed him. And at his request also, a major disaster declaration is signed and ready to go. We have everybody ready in Puerto Rico, the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, and also on the forest fires in California. So we have a great team. Unfortunately, we have some very, very powerful natural disasters. On the therapeutics front, this is what I've been looking to do for a long time. This is a great thing. Today, I'm pleased to make a truly historic announcement in our battle against the China virus that will save countless lives. The FDA has issued an emergency use authorization, and that's such a powerful term, emergency use authorization for a treatment known as convalescent plasma. This is a powerful therapy that transfuses very, very strong antibodies from the blood of recovered patients to help treat patients battling a current infection. It's had an incredible rate of success. Today's action will dramatically expand access to this treatment. And I want to thank Dr. Hahn and Secretary Azar. I want to thank the FDA, all of the people that have been working very hard on this. It showed tremendous potential. This is the only possible, and it's only made possible because of Operation Warp Speed. That is everybody working together. We're years ahead of approvals. We would be if we went by the speed levels of past administration. We'd be 2 years, 3 years behind where we are today. And that includes in vaccines that you'll be hearing about very soon, very shortly. To deliver treatments and vaccine to save lives, we're removing unnecessary barriers and delays, not by cutting corners, but by marshaling the full power of the federal government. We provided $48 million to fund the Mayo Clinic study that tested the efficacy of convalescent plasma for patients with the virus. Through this study, over 100,000 Americans have already enrolled to receive this treatment, and it has proven to reduce mortality by 35%. It's a tremendous number. The FDA, MIT, Harvard, and Mount Sinai Hospital have also found convalescent plasma to be a very effective method of fighting this horrible disease. Based on the science and the data, the FDA has made the independent determination that the treatment is safe and very effective. Recently, we provided up to $270 million to the American Red Cross and America's Blood Centers to support the collection of up to 360,000 units of plasma. In late July, we launched a nationwide campaign to ask patients who have recovered, and these are patients that have been incredible the way they've donated, But these are people recovered from the virus to donate plasma. Since then, weekly plasma donations have doubled. And today I once again urge all Americans who have recovered from the virus to go to coronavirus.gov and sign up and donate plasma today, please. It's been really an incredible people. The country has united so strongly behind this, and I'll go over the numbers, but if you look at what's happened and the success that we've had that people don't talk about, the United States has experienced the lowest case fatality rate of any major country in the world. You don't hear that. The European Union's case fatality rate is estimated to be 3 times higher than that in the United States. Europe has seen 33% more fatalities compared to a typical non-pandemic year than the United States. And I just want to ask 2 of our people that have done such a fantastic job, Alex Azar and Stephen Hahn, to say a few words. And Stephen, I want to thank you because the FDA really stepped up, and especially over the last few days in getting this done. The results have been incredible, and I think you'll see the results even go up very substantially. So we appreciate it, and maybe I'll ask Alex to go first, and then Stephen. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thumper, let's...
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. Thanks for the bold leadership that allowed us to deliver this very...
Yeah, let's go back to the discussion. Anyway, I want to get a chance to really go through the Red Pill Expo program and what we've got planned and some of the things before we run out of time. Ed, I know that it's important to you to talk about why the red pill in Jekyll Island. That's a perfect segue, okay?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was before the president came on. So picking up that thread, I'll try and condense this because I see we're running out of time already. We wanted to hold this on Jekyll Island because back in June, we thought a major part of the red pills that we would be dispersing would have to do with the economy. And our plan still includes that concept because the destruction of the economy, I should say, I believe is one of the major motivating forces behind this whole pandemic. But anyway, having said that, everybody wanted to go to Jekyll Island because it's sort of famous as the notorious location where the Federal Reserve System was conceived in secret back in 1910. So we were going to have it there and have a wonderful conference center there. We're going to talk about the Federal Reserve and the monetary system and the banking system. But of course, things happened in the meantime. And now the uppermost thing on most people's mind is this coronavirus thing. Mm-hmm. So we went into hibernation mode to see how things were going to turn out. Now we know how things are going to turn out. They're talking about a second wave. And we know that although there are well-known controls for this virus, if the virus is unique at all, whether it's unique or not is immaterial because we know that there are certain very inexpensive things that can control it, cost about $10 or $20. Doctors using these things, they say that the treatment costs about $10 or $20, and some of them have had 100% response, improvement, cures, not 35% like the president is talking about, and not being, I'm sure that this thing that the president is announcing, whatever it is going to be very expensive, probably going to cost even more than the use of the ventilators, which produces about $35,000 or $37,000 per patient to the hospitals and to the medical profession. That's a lot better than $10 or $20, which is why they're using it. I'm kind of horrified by what I heard in the president's statement. I have to review it more and see what he's really talking about. But it looks like it's more business as usual. And I hope it's not. But anyway, we'll be talking about that for sure. By the time the event comes along in 6 more weeks, we'll have a lot of information on what the president just said. So now, getting to the chase, we decided we waited long enough. We waited to see. Now we see. We know that this is not going to go away. We know that our captors, I'll call them that for now, have big plans for us, and it won't make any difference whether the virus is real or not. It won't make any difference whether it's deadly or not. It won't make any difference how widespread it is or not. It doesn't make any difference. They're going to present it as though it's a life and death thing, and that'll be the media content, and most people will believe it because they saw it on their daily news day in and day out, day in and day out, so it must be true. So we know now we've waited. Now we see, and we're not going to remain hidden anymore. It's time to damn the torpedoes and full speed ahead. It's time to take the initiative. We're going to the event, and we've called ahead. We've talked to the people there, talked to business people on the island, and they're hoping we will come. They like us there, by the way. We've talked to the people at the conference center, and it's very clear that there will be signs up everywhere because they're required to put up the signs that you can't enter without a mask and you got to stay 6 feet apart. But we're informed by people on the island that nobody pays any attention to those signs on the island. People are doing what they want. Some of them are wearing the masks. Some are standing in the circles, but most are not, and nobody seems to care. It's interesting because the governor of Georgia has gone on record as being opposed to all of these issues, these mandates, as they're called, and he's not going to enforce them. The state of Georgia owns Jekyll Island, and so the island is policed by the state police, and we've been informed that the state police on Jekyll Island have shown no interest whatsoever in enforcing these silly signs that are posted around. And you can go into restaurants, nobody's wearing a mask, nobody's sitting 6 feet apart, all that sort of thing, even though the signs are on the doors and all that. So we were encouraged by that. We thought, well, maybe there's a little slice of America with some independence there on Jekyll Island. So we're encouraged to go ahead. We're not afraid. We're not going to be waiting and seeing anymore. We're willing to take some risks. We're thinking of the statement from the Admiral David Farragut at the Battle of Mobile, the Bay of Mobile.
Mobile Bay.
All these mines, these water mines, were in the bay, and they were sinking the ships, and some of the ships have gone into reverse engine. They were backing up, banging into each other. The tide was banging them into each other. And the admiral climbed up the mast and he looked around. He said, "This is looking pretty bad. What do? We just sit here and are afraid to go ahead and bang into each other and sink, or what?" So he yells down, "Damn the torpedoes." That's what they call the water mines. "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." That's what we decided to do. It's a battle cry, and that's our version of it. We agree totally with Alex a moment ago. If it's not now, then when? If it's not us, who? Let's go. So that's our vision, and we hope everybody will come. And already I looked at our sales figures on the internet this morning, and we're just loaded with ticket sales coming in since they looked at the video. I'm so happy to see that we struck a nerve, apparently. Mm-hmm. We want to pack the place. We want to become kind of like the poster child for the world, that there are people left in the world, especially in America, that are not afraid to stand for what they believe in. That's the motive behind the Red Pill Expo. That's the theme of the expo, and that's what we're going to do, by God, and we're going to say, damn the uncertainties and full speed ahead. I don't know if that got through or not. Did it?
I heard you loud and clear, Ed. I'm not sure if Dan might have frozen. Looks like he did freeze. But okay. Yeah, I do encourage everybody to come out. We're going to have some excellent speakers. We'll be talking about what's going on with the corona crisis, the burning down of our economy, the great reset, the move toward a cashless society. And there's going to be a lot about the Federal Reserve and what's happening with the money. This is going to be such a big topic in the years ahead. And so we figured we'd tackle it head on. They're looking at the global currency they're trying to create. But in light of everything that's going on, naturally, we're going to spend quite a bit of time dealing with current events. And this is information that you're not going to find anywhere else, from speakers that are amazing, from people who are known around the world, and who the mainstream media, the lamestream bought-off fake media, doesn't want you to hear from. So this will be your opportunity to get this information, to benefit yourself, to share with others, and we really hope to see you there. And I hear Dan back on the line. Hey, Dan.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got a very unstable internet connection, and Alex, you know that I've got terrific internet here, so it always happens.
There he goes again.
Oh, wow.
I think they're out to get Dan, aren't they?
It's the deep state.
Well, when we get into heavy issues and things that they don't want people to hear about, it's funny how that happens.
Yeah.
But I do have your Red Pill website up here showing right now the logistics, places to stay there. Mm-hmm. We had the speakers presented there. Oh, look, Alex is going to be there.
Oh, my goodness.
And by the way, please be aware that a lot of this needs to be updated. And the next couple of days, you're going to see a lot of changes on the speaker list. And I think most of the accommodations are still set, but we have to confirm with the hotels and make sure that there have been no changes in policy. But I think we're pretty good with what you see, except please expect to see a lot more speakers than you see right now. We're in the process of lining that up as we speak.
And I can tell you folks too, Jekyll Island, I went there with my wife some years ago. It is absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful location. It'll be like having a vacation and a learning experience all rolled up into one, plus all the fun with all the connections. It's going to be awesome. And if you haven't read The Creature from Jekyll Island, that might be some good homework before you get there. So
yeah, and do bring your copy of Creature from Jekyll Island with you, and you can have Ed Griffin personalize that for you. I have to tell you, Ed, you're a superhero in the liberty movement just because of that book, if nothing else, because it does such a great job of explaining why we are in the position we're in.
Well, I think the money system is at the core, the root of it. I mean, there are so many roots. Let's just face it, it's just not one root. Well, there may be one route, but it soon branches off into quite a few. It's a spiritual battle, I suppose. I agree with that at the hardcore. But then it soon becomes a monetary issue. It becomes an educational issue. It becomes so many things branch out immediately. And I think money and the control of people through economics is very, very central to everything that happens. Mm-hmm. So we can't afford to overlook that.
By the way, Ed, I'd like to tell you, thank you for vitamin B17. I don't know if you recall, but my golden retriever had the brain tumor. And we did a CT scan here in March, and it was almost completely gone.
And that's because of the Laetrile?
I've been using the 100 milligram capsules of the vitamin B17.
Yeah, good. Well, as I said in my book, it doesn't work for everybody, but it works for so many more people than the orthodox therapies that it's ridiculous.
Thank you for your advocacy for that, for vitamin B17.
Well, I'm glad it turned out well. Thank you.
Well, and we've got quite a few more of those case histories. As a matter of fact, people who listen to this radio show, we've got a number of people. Ed, you've met a few of them that used B17 Laetrile and have beaten back cancer as a result of doing that. And they're right here in Montana. I know a number of them very personally.
Well, yes, we get mail all the time. At first, it was so invigorating to hear that we were on the right track, because I had a few personal experiences, and I had interviewed, as you know, the doctors who were using amygdalin in the treatment of cancer, and their case histories were excellent, much better than the doctors who were using orthodox therapy. So I was working off the records of the doctors in the clinics, which I had a lot of confidence in. But after the book was published and I started getting letters directly from the families, the wives, the husbands, the fathers, and the mothers of their children, all of whom were recovering because of this, it took out a different proportion, because these were real people that I knew, or in many cases I could talk to on the phone. So it's very heartening to know, when you're a guy like me and you tackle these topics, you don't know whether you're on the right track. You get to the point where you see so much evidence that you say, it has to be true. It's definite. There's no other explanation. but still there's always that little haunting question in your mind. Gee, what have I gone off the deep end? But once you get the story out and you start getting the feedback from the real world and it's all consistent, then you can take a deep sigh of relief and say, well, thank God I didn't mess up on that one.
Well, when the veterinarian calls and goes, what are you doing? And after he took the second CT scan, and it was a quarter of her brain that was involved. Wow. And there were only a couple of spots left in March when we took the second CT scan.
Well, that's especially interesting because the brain is one of the hardest organs to treat. Yes. Because of the blood-brain barrier that keeps the amygdalin from circulating into the brain tissue. So he's probably using DMSO or something to carry it in. I don't know, different ways of overcoming that obstacle, but the brain is one of the hardest. The liver and the brain are the hardest organs to treat.
Well, and
I shouldn't say, don't forget the pancreas. I should say that's really number three. You know?
Well, and I have to tell you the inverse of that. And this has happened in my life where I've taken your book and some of your information as well as B17. I've got a new thing that a good friend of mine brought to me who survived. He was literally on death's doorstep by using a product called SEAC-T. There are things out there, natural remedies out there, and I've taken those to friends and family members, and they chose to ignore them, and they ended up passing away. And that is difficult because you know that if they had just tried, maybe it would have been different.
It's hard because you know from experience that the stuff is good, and yet some of your people closest to you in your life. There's some woman I'm thinking of that I had been talking to about this for years, and when she was diagnosed with cancer, she just said quite bluntly, she said, look, I'll come and visit you, but on one condition, that you don't talk to me about this.
Wow. And
of course she didn't make it, but it's so sad. But in a way, what we're talking about, the red pill and all that sort of thing, it's kind of symptomatic of how easy it is, apparently how easy it is to program the human mind so that it cannot recognize truth when it sees it. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah, well, that
overcome.
Problem with cognitive dissonance is a big issue because Americans suffer from a failure to connect with reality because of fear, and that's exactly what this COVID-19 thing has done, and that's why I think so many of us are so disturbed to see everybody walking around in their masks and social distancing and doing all these things. And that's also very much a reason why we need Red Pill Expo. We need Red Pill University. We need to pull the curtain off the master, pull the curtain back, and let people know what's really happening in the world.
Well, that's what we're going to do on Jekyll Island on October 10 and 11. We're going to be handing out a lot of red pills, and I don't think you're going to see many masks there, unless they're Guy Fawkes masks or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I wear my Groucho mask when I've got to go into the store, and they say you've got to wear a mask. I've got this great Groucho Marx mask that is basically a pair of glasses with these big eyebrows and a big rubber nose, and this little Hitler mustache. And I figure I've gotten more laughs off that. I think a lot of people feel the same way we do.
Well, G. Edward, in Washington State, the most favorite mask is one that says Inslee is an idiot, or this mask is as effective as our governor.
Amen. Well, we're kind of running out of time, but let's talk again about how how soon are you going to have information up? And we've got the site up. You've done a tremendous amount of work on it over the weekend. We need to make sure that people understand we are going to be looking for the very best speakers we can get to this event. And it's not going to be a one-trick pony. This is going to be an event we're going to be covering medicine. We're going to be covering COVID. We're going to be covering the economy. We're going to be covering things like Antifa and BLM and things that are really hampering our ability to live in civil society. We're going to be talking about a lot of things, aren't we?
Everything you can think of, which means more than we can handle. So that's our problem, is how do we filter? How do we select what is the most important? And of course, it's beyond our power to do that. So we just do the best we can. And fortunately, we've got the Red Pill University, which is 24/7, 365 days a year. So we can continue the information flow and cover everything eventually at the university level. But the important thing, I think, is for people to get together and stop hiding in their houses. One of the things I mentioned in that video, which you displayed there, is my experience the night before last in a little local town here. We went in because I was invited to participate in what we call the Cruising for Truth. It's like the old days when the kids used to cruise down, the main street with their cars and show off and all that sort of thing. It's coming back into popularity now. So I thought, well, that's great. Let's go cruise for truth and put our banners up and put our slogans on the window and put the American flag on the antenna, whatever we want to do, and just participate and just be part of it. So we went in 2 nights ago, and sure enough, there they were going up and down the street. And these are mostly young kids. They're showing off their trucks and their fancy cars. And it's become somewhat politically oriented because none of them are wearing masks, and they got these slogans. Just we're talking about laughing at all this idiotic stuff, and they don't believe in the pandemic at all. And a lot of the cars are pulled off to the side. You can pull off and stop and say, what goes on. Say, hi there, I like your car. I like your slogan on the window. What's your name? And sort of thing. People are meeting and they're saying, let's get together. Let's do something about this in our local community. We need to be ready in case they come and invade our little town. That's why the opposition doesn't want us out of our houses. That's why they want the lockdown. Because as long as we're sitting in our houses, we only see the world through that television set or a little video screen. And that's what they want, to narrow our view just to that. They don't want us to shake hands with each other. They don't want us to get to know each other, have coffee, say, what's your name again? And, you know my uncle? Yeah, we went to school together. They don't want us to form coalitions and groupings so that we can organize and do things to push back against this. That's the reason they want us locked down, I think, or one of the two reasons. The other reason is to destroy the economy. But anyway, the point is we've got to meet together. Now, one of the reasons we're putting on this expo, maybe the primary reason, is so that people can meet and form coalitions all across the country and around the world. But after that, then what? That's where the university comes in, because one of the big plans for the Red Pill University is to create campuses in every county in the United States and in similar political subdivisions around the world, where people do meet together. They do have coffee together. They do find out the names of each other. They get their telephone numbers. They actually organize, go to meetings. Maybe they select the candidate that they're going to put up for office. Maybe they influence the selection of the board of education. All of these things are possible only when people get together, meet each other face to face. So that is the idea to keep in mind in everything that we're trying to do. The information is vitally important. The lectures are terribly important because there's the data, there's the substance of what we're doing. But until we get together and form into groups, nothing will happen. So please keep that in mind when you look at everything we do. That's what our motive is to make things happen.
Right. Well, Alex, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have much time to do this. We're really out of time here. But Alex, thank you for being our guest. Ed, thank you for being our guest. We need to turn the program over now to our campaign program with Patrick Howley. So thank you, gentlemen, and I look forward to working with you on the Red Pill Expo.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot, Dan.
Have a good one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, J. Edward.
Well, all righty, everybody. Salute, fellas. Here we go. It's that time of the week again. Buckle up.
Welcome to Patrick Howley's Campaign Show, your window into the 2020 elections on Patriot Soapbox 24/7 live stream.
Digital soldiers General Flynn spoke of. We are the last line of defense against tyranny. Together, we will break down the 2D narrative once and for all, and President Donald Trump will win the Electoral College once again. So let's get to work.
This is The Campaign Show with your host, Patrick Howley.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Campaign Show. I'm your host, Patrick Howley. As always, I'm better than Jim Acosta, that clown on CNN. And we've got a good show for you tonight, a lot going on. We've got some breaking news to start off the evening. Trump to announce plasma treatment authorized for COVID-19, according to the Associated Press. After expressing frustration at the slow pace of approval for coronavirus treatments, President Donald Trump was set to announce on Sunday the emergency authorization of convalescent plasma for COVID-19 patients. The announcement will come after days of White House officials suggesting there were politically motivated delays by the Food and Drug Administration in approving a vaccine and therapeutics for the disease that has upended Trump's re-election chances. On the eve of the Republican National Convention, Trump was set to issue the emergency order. It would make it easier for some patients to obtain the treatment. So we've got convalescent plasma treatment. Now, in addition to hydroxychloroquine, however, of course, as we know, the FDA, due to political pressure, revoked the emergency use authorization for hydroxychloroquine to treat coronavirus after initially approving it. I do know, however, that there have been many stories of people saying that hydroxychloroquine is working. And the thing that's fascinating to me about these issues is, especially with like certain kinds of people in the normie class, it's always like, you know, whatever there's a right or left kind of proscription applied to each and every one of these issues. So on hydroxychloroquine, for instance, because Trump is supporting it, it becomes a partisan issue whereby the left is against it. But the issue itself has nothing to do with right or left or conservative or liberal. It's literally about, can we treat people for this virus that, of course, has a 99% survival rate. And so you would think, and of course, it's just a total scamdemic to me now, as far as I'm concerned. But back when it first started, when we were taking this more seriously, you know, we were saying, look, hydroxychloroquine is saving people's lives. It's helping people. And yet it becomes a partisan issue. It becomes an issue where the Democrats have to stop it, have to try to block it, simply because President Trump is the one who put it out there. And actually, Tucker Carlson was the one who first put it on TV, and then Trump quickly adopted it. They went through a ton of research, realized that it was in fact helping people, but this becomes a partisan issue. So I'm sure that this plasma treatment will now become a partisan issue. There's no question in my mind. The Democrats will immediately start saying that this is junk science, this is voodoo, etc. Simply because there's a hyper-partisan element to every single thing that happens in our world now. That's just the way it is. That's the paradigm that the left has inflicted upon us.